Today, numerous standing stones, tombs, and other megalithic ruins dot the landscape of Ireland, many built 1,000 years before the pyramids, all relics of an age long past, and of a now vanished culture. But who built these ancient monuments, and why? Ireland was first permanently occupied by humans from around 9,000 to 8,000 BCE, though there may have been small numbers before that. This is relatively late by Eurasian standards, as before then, the island of Ireland had been covered in ice. These first hunter-gatherers moved northward from refugiums further south, such as Iberia, southern France, the Italian peninsula, and Balkans, with one study suggesting that most early Irish hunter-gatherer ancestry came from present-day Italy. They traveled north, following the retreating ice sheets and gradually populating northern Europe. The early Irelanders, as J.P. Mallory put it, lived off the land, neither tilling the earth nor rearing livestock. Agriculture arrived in Ireland at around 4000 BCE, with the coming of the Neolithic, that brought the cultivation of crops and the first domesticated animals. It has long been debated whether the spread of agriculture represented a spread of people or merely a spread of ideas or a cultural package. However, with the latest genetic studies, we can now conclude that agriculture was spread to Ireland and other parts of Europe by actual movement of peoples. This population, known as early European farmers, originated in Anatolia, near the Aegean region, at the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, and then spread west into Europe, starting at around 7000 BCE, though of course interacting and eventually intermingling with earlier hunter-gatherer communities as they did so, likely absorbing both genes and cultural elements from these local peoples. The language of the early farmers is unknown, though I think it is probable that it was related to Minoan, Basque, Paleo-Sardinian, or Etruscan, all apparent pre-Indo-European tongues. Generally speaking, there were two main groups of farmers in Neolithic Europe: the mainland Central European linear pottery culture, and the southern, more coastal, imprinted cardium. It seems like the first Irish farmers arrived via the southern route, coming up the Atlantic coast. Being located in the extreme northwest of Europe, agriculture was well entrenched on the continent before it reached Hibernia, at around 4000 BCE or a little after. As agriculture became established, population density skyrocketed, and societies became more complex and stratified, as the food surplus allowed for the creation of specialized divisions of labor. It is in this context that we see the first constructions of vast megalithic structures. At the time, as indicated from similarities in building styles, it seems like there was a common culture connecting much of Atlantic Europe. This architectural tradition likely started in northwestern France, modern Brittany, and spread along sea lanes across the region of Atlantic Europe. Specifically, we see passage tombs all throughout the Atlantic coastal regions, in modern France, British Isles, Ireland, Low Countries, and Iberia, even spreading east into the Mediterranean. There are different theories on why they were built. Many are obviously tombs, but almost certainly had religious or ceremonial uses as well. It seems probable that they represented these early farmers' close relationship with and intimate understanding of the solar cycle and passing of the seasons, which was required for their way of life. In addition, they may have served as meeting centers, drawing people together from across wide locales to participate in festivals and exchanges. The simplest of these structures, sometimes called dolmens, are often composed of just two large stones acting as pillars or walls, and another large one laid across them as a roof. However, they became gradually more ostentatious and complex, perhaps as local rulers or strongmen sought to outdo each other's works, or even compete for some sort of divine favor. Of course, this is speculation, but to me at least it seems plausible, as there are examples of similar contests in recorded history. In Ireland, Newgrange, perhaps the most famous passage tomb, was likely built between 3300 and 2900 BCE. The impressive tomb features a central pathway, which is aligned in such a way that the sun would shine through during the winter solstice, and may have been a temple of sorts, in addition to a burial site. In the past, some have speculated that Neolithic Europe was relatively egalitarian, centered around the worship of an all-loving mother goddess. However, there is some evidence to suggest that there was at least a degree of hierarchy, in which a small elite mustered the labor of the masses to construct such impressive monuments. For instance, an individual interred inside the passage tomb of Newgrange displayed high runs of homozygosity, indicating that he was likely inbred. Since inbreeding appears to be uncommon in the larger population, this, combined with his ornate burial, suggests that he was a member of an elite, perhaps priestly class, which practiced incest to preserve a bloodline, much like the pharaonic line of antique Egypt, or some dynasties such as the Habsburgs of medieval and early modern Europe. Likewise, it could be a result of a small pool of chiefly families who only intermarried among each other, and thus had limited options, which resulted in inbreeding. Ancestry seems to have been preserved through patrilineal lines, much like later recorded dynasties, during the ancient and medieval periods throughout the world. In addition, other individuals found in parts of Ireland in different tombs were related to this man at Newgrange, suggesting an island-wide elite may have existed. Interestingly enough, this ancient, prehistoric incest seems to have been preserved in a medieval Irish legend about a king who would have to restart the daily solar cycle by having sex with his sister, providing a tantalizing connection to the man at Newgrange, who was a result of a brother-sister or parent-child coupling. Furthermore, an old place name for the nearby Douth Passage tomb is the Hill of Incest or Hill of Sin. To me at least, the possibility of this somehow being a sheer coincidence seems very unlikely, and as improbable as it may sound, this legend really did persist from the Neolithic through the Bronze and Iron Ages down to medieval Ireland when it was written down. This implies at least some degree of cultural continuity from Neolithic to medieval periods, which has to be explored further. This DNA evidence also gives a glimpse into what relations between European farmers and hunter-gatherers may have been like. The two groups likely lived adjacent to each other for a very long time, and, like in other parts of Europe, there was eventually interbreeding between farmers and hunter-gatherers, and it is possible that individuals with Western European hunter-gatherer ancestry may have played an important part in Neolithic communities, perhaps even having a resurgence. This is partly evidenced by elevated hunter-gatherer ancestry in potentially elite samples, such as an individual buried in the court tomb of Park Nabinia and another at Ballynahatty, who possessed higher than average hunter-gatherer ancestry. Similar examples of seemingly high-status burials with more than average hunter-gatherer ancestry have also been found in other parts of Europe, such as areas of modern France. This is further supported by grave goods and burial positions, which seem to have more in common with Mesolithic hunter-gatherer customs than those of sedentary farmers. It is possible that individuals with connections to hunter-gatherers were respected or even revered in Neolithic communities. A darker alternative is that the hunter-gatherers struck back, emerging from their primeval woodland strongholds and actually taking over some agricultural communities, imposing themselves as an elite. At the end of the day, however, this is mostly anecdotal and possibly due to random chance or happenstance. Nevertheless, it is interesting to speculate that some hunter-gatherers gained a prominent position in agricultural societies, and aspects of their culture may have survived the transition to farming. This megalithic golden age would not last, however. Far to the east, on the Pontic steppe, near the Black and Caspian Seas, a new people was on the rise. Known as the Yamnaya culture, they probably spoke a form of Proto-Indo-European, had domesticated the horse, and seemingly were not adverse to raiding their neighbors. Some of these Yamnaya people migrated or invaded west into Europe, probably conquering and interbreeding with Central European farmers, which resulted in the corded ware culture that carried Indo-European languages into the rest of Europe. In much of Western Europe, we see a population replacement that happened disproportionately along male lineages, suggesting that local men were killed, enslaved, or otherwise excluded as the invaders took the women, a pattern consistent with violent invasion. In Ireland and areas of the British Isles, this replacement was even more dramatic, with an estimated 80 to 90% of the late Neolithic population dying or being killed off and replaced by these Indo-European speaking newcomers. Such a stark demographic change suggests to me that disease may have played a primary role, as conquest alone would likely have resulted in more of a merger of populations. These Bronze Age invaders have a strong genetic similarity with later populations of Ireland and the British Isles, suggesting that although further shifts occurred, the base population of these areas was established at the start of the Bronze Age. Though they seem to have largely died off or been absorbed by the people who replaced them, the legacy of these megalith builders would live on. Later peoples continued to use megalithic sites for their own purposes, such as the Bronze Age Bellbeaker people, later Iron Age cultures, and even the literate Irish kingdoms of the early Middle Ages. For instance, the tomb at Carrowmore has been called Queen Maeve's Tomb, named after a Celtic goddess and/or mythological queen who was worshipped centuries after the tomb was built. Clearly, such places were viewed with awe and apprehension, long after their builders were dead and the language they spoke long gone. Now, in the 21st century, sites such as Newgrange, North, Park Nabinia, and others are prominent tourist attractions that draw many visitors every year. The mystique of such mysterious monuments and the enigmatic civilization that built them fascinate and captivate people from all around the world, and, in all likelihood, will continue to.